Napalm Death's musical shift on their third album, Harmony Corruption, 1990, from chaotic grindcore intensity to pure death metal structure was one of the most historic moments in extreme music, and also one of the most polarizing. This drastic shift didn't happen by accident. It was the result of a total lineup overhaul, their choice of recording studio, and an evolution in their artistic vision at the time. Here is a deep and accurate breakdown of the reasons behind the change. 1. Total lineup overhaul and the birth of a new era. Between the release of From Enslavement to Obliteration, 1988, and Harmony Corruption, 1990, Napalm Death went through a massive personnel exodus. The original members, who were key to shaping the blueprint of grindcore, left the band, including Lee Dorian, the original vocalist, left and later formed the doom metal band Cathedral. Bill Steer, the lead guitarist, chose to quit to focus full-time on his own death metal/grind band, Carcass. Losing these two core members forced bassist Shane Embury and drummer Mick Harris to essentially rebuild the band from scratch. They brought in 3 new members who carried a very different musical influence. Mark Barney Greenway from the band Benediction came in on vocals. His vocal style was deep, thick, and powerful death growls, completely different from Lee Dorian's high-speed chaotic shrieks. Mitch Harris from U.S. grindcore band Righteous Pigs and Jesse Pintado from U.S. grindcore giants Terrorizer joined as the new guitar duo, bringing in 2 American guitarists and a British death metal vocalist automatically changed Napalm Death's songwriting DNA. Bill Steer's previous style of frenzied blurred distortion, all noisy and chaotic, was replaced by powerful riff layering, tight synchronization, and more structured song architecture typical of the American scene. 2. Studio choice and the influence of producer Scott Burns. The second biggest factor was the band's decision to leave the comfort of their local studio in Birmingham, England, and fly to Tampa, Florida to record at Morrisound Recording. At the time, Morrisound was the benchmark for the exploding death metal genre worldwide. That's where legendary bands like Death, Morbid Angel, Obituary, and Deicide created their masterpieces. Napalm Death hired Scott Burns, the legendary producer who shaped the Florida death metal sound into something iconic. Under Scott Burns' direction, songs were made longer. No more sub-2-minute tracks or microbursts lasting a few seconds, like on Scum. Mick Harris' drumming became more precise and structured, shifting from pure chaotic blast beats to heavy, sludgy mid-tempo groove rhythms. The production was far clearer, thicker, and more professionally polished compared to the lo-fi, low-quality aesthetic of their early grindcore vinyl. Their connection to the Florida scene was even solidified by the guest vocals of John Tardy from Obituary and Glenn Benton from Deicide on the track Unfit Earth. 3. Burnout on the monotonous noise format. Before recording Harmony Corruption, the members of Napalm Death, especially Shane Embury and Mick Harris, started feeling the artistic limitations of pure grindcore. After releasing dozens of super short songs focused purely on speed and uncompromising extreme noise, they developed a desire to write actual songs, meaning songs with verses, choruses, tempo changes, and clear riff dynamics. They wanted to prove that Napalm Death could deliver their social and political aggression and anger, which they still kept from their punk/grindcore roots, through a more grand, heavy, and musical structure. The result was more structured legendary tracks like Suffer the Children and If the Truth Be Known. What was the impact and legacy of Harmony Corruption? This change triggered a harsh backlash and disappointment from old-school grindcore fans who felt Napalm Death had sold out to the rising American death metal trend. But for the global scene, Harmony Corruption became the main gateway that introduced structured extreme music to a wider audience, and it laid the strong foundation that kept Napalm Death relevant for decades to come. The members of Napalm Death had very different reactions to the harsh criticism from hardcore purist fans at the time, ranging from a defensive stance, justification for the lineup changes, to honest admissions years later that they themselves weren't fully satisfied with the final result of the album. As a band that came out of the highly protective UK DIY, do-it-yourself, underground and crust punk scene, accusations of selling out or chasing the American trend hit like a sledgehammer. One response came from Shane Embury, who defended the move as a rejection of creative stagnation. When interviewed by extreme music magazines Kerrang! And Terrorizer during the 1990 to 1992 era, while promoting Harmony Corruption and Utopia Banished, Shane repeatedly told journalists, bringing in the new guitar duo, Mitch Harris and Jesse Pintado, brought a new direction to the songwriting, and the band refused to become stagnant or die creatively just to satisfy purist listeners who wanted us to keep playing at the same tempo as You Suffer, the 1-second song from the Scum album. Shane Embury, the bassist and main driving force behind the songwriting, was one of the most vocal in facing that criticism. For him, the shift toward death metal was a natural evolution, especially since they'd brought in two new guitarists, Mitch Harris and Jesse Pintado, who came from different musical backgrounds. Then, there was the honest admission from Barney Greenway. He acknowledged that Harmony Corruption was too clean. Mark Barney Greenway, who had just joined as vocalist, was in a unique position because he was a huge fan of the early Napalm Death era himself. Addressing fan criticism, Barney took a very down-to-earth stance and agreed on one thing: the production was too polished. In various interviews, including his explanation in the booklet/liner notes for the documentary book Noise for Music's Sake, official release July 8, 2003 via Earache Records. This official retrospective compilation running dozens of pages, Barney Greenway admitted that recording at Morrisound Studio with producer Scott Burns made Napalm Death's original dirty and noisy character come out a bit too clinical and polished. Barney understood why longtime fans felt the band had lost its musical direction, and he made it clear that the final result of the album wasn't because they wanted to become a pop or commercial band. It was the result of a studio experiment that didn't fully live up to their raw expectations. Unlike the other members, Mick Harris chose to quit out of frustration. Legendary drummer Mick Harris, the guy who coined the term blast beat, was the one hit hardest psychologically by the criticism. Harris was the main gatekeeper of grindcore and punk aesthetics within the band. Harris' response to the new direction, and to the fan backlash, was full of frustration. He felt the band's music after Harmony Corruption was drifting further and further away from the pure speed vision he worshipped. Rather than keep arguing about the band's new, more structured direction, Mick Harris ultimately left Napalm Death in 1992 after the Utopia Banished album because he felt his personal connection to the band's musical direction was gone. Napalm Death eventually returned to their grindcore roots. But that journey back home didn't happen overnight. It was a long evolution that went through several experimental phases. Hay raised the timeline of how Napalm Death finally turned things around and reclaimed their throne as the kings of grindcore. 1. Immediate reaction via the EP Mass Appeal Madness, 1991. The band realized right away that the sound on Harmony Corruption was too clean. Just 1 year after that album came out, they dropped an EP called Mass Appeal Madness. On this release, they deliberately recorded music that was dirtier, faster, and brought back the grindcore/crust punk aggression that had gotten lost in Florida. 2. The Transition Phase, Utopia Banished, 1992. On this fourth album, drummer Mick Harris left and was replaced by Danny Herrera, who's still their drummer to this day. With Danny, Napalm Death released Utopia Banished. This album is often called the perfect meeting point of death grind. They didn't completely ditch the death metal structure, but they injected back the insane blast beat speed and D-beat punk influence that powered early grindcore. 3. The groovy industrial experimental phase, middle 90s. The mid to late 90s was Napalm Death's biggest experimental period. Through albums like Fear, Emptiness, Despair, 1994, Diatribes, 1996, and Inside the Torn Apart, 1997, they actually moved away from both conventional death metal and grindcore. They experimented with slower tempos, groove metal beats, and industrial metal influences inspired by bands like Godflesh and Pitchshifter. 4. Full return to pure grindcore on Enemy of the Music Business, 2000. After almost a decade of groove experiments, the members of Napalm Death started craving full speed, no compromise intensity again. Their full return to the grindcore throne happened in 2000 with the masterpiece album Enemy of the Music Business. Produced by Russ Russell, who understood the band's original character, this album was a clear statement. Songs went back to being short, tight, and destructive. Danny Herrera's drumming dominated with constant superfast blast beats over 200 BPM. All groove experiments and clean vocals were stripped out, replaced with pure, unfiltered aggression. From Enemy of the Music Business in 2000 to their modern albums today, Napalm Death has consistently stayed on the grindcore/death grind path. They successfully merged the technical precision they learned from the death metal era with the chaotic speed and political ideology from their original grindcore roots.